You're listening to the Art of Procurement, episode 123.
Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast with your host, Philip Eidson. Here, thought leaders share the trends, strategies, and tactics that you can use to elevate the role of procurement and your career.
Hi there, and welcome to today's Art of Procurement. And today's guest was the first ever interviewee on the Art of Procurement all the way back in November 2015. It was episode 2. My guest then, as it is today, was Tania Seary, the founder of Procurious, as well as the procurement consulting firm The Faculty, and a recruitment company called The Source. Tania back then joined me to talk about all things related to the importance of creating a personal brand through social media. And I approached Tania back last November, 2 Novembers ago now, from nowhere, frankly, inviting her to be on the show, and I thought that she would make a great first guest. And the topic of procurement and social media was one that I thought would give this new podcast really a great head start. Tania said yes without hesitation, and I actually asked her why she did that in today's show. I'm really happy and proud to say that, fast forward 18 months, and Tania and I have become great friends, and I'll actually be participating in Procurious's Big Ideas Summit, which happens later this week. It's actually on February 23rd. And to support Big Idea, I've produced a series of 5 15-minute podcasts that are going to be available to digital delegates both during and after the event. And so I felt like this was a great time to invite Tania back onto the show. And so we focus on a couple of topics, and they both actually intertwine with each other. First, I asked Tania for an update on how things are going at Procurious, and we both share our own motivations for following the paths that we have. In fact, Tania actually turns the table on me at one point by asking a couple of questions on why I started the Art of Procurement, and it turns out that, we have very similar motivations. We then talk about the notion of Procurement 4.0, and that is going to be the focus of the Big Idea Summit. And I've interviewed some great guests recently, and Bill Huber from a couple of episodes ago actually immediately comes to mind, who have shared their thoughts on the impact of digitization on what and how that companies buy. Procurement 4.0 just goes a step higher. It considers the broader implications on our profession of Industry 4.0, essentially. So it encompasses digitization, but also things like delivery drones, self-driving cars, 3D printing, and new material compositions. The answer, frankly, is that we don't actually know how it will impact procurement, only that it will have an impact. So the big idea to me is all about being prepared and thinking differently. Okay, so that's enough from me. Let's go straight into my conversation with Tania. So hi everybody, and welcome to today's Art of Procurement. And I'm joined today by Tania Seary. Tania is the founder of a trio of procurement companies, Procurious, The Faculty, and The Source. And Tania, this is your second time on the Art of Procurement, so welcome back.
Thank you very much, Philip.
Definitely thanks for joining me. And I'm not sure if you're actually aware at the time, but you're actually the very first guest that I interviewed on the Art of Procurement back, November now of 2015. It seems so long ago. And I reached out blind to invite you. You had no idea who I was, and you responded almost immediately saying yes. And I've always been very thankful that you did that, but I've also wondered kind of why did you say yes?
Well, look, I must say I didn't know that I was yours. So I'm absolutely delighted, and I'm honoured. So thank you for reaching out to me. I was really excited to hear from you because really that what you're doing with Art of Procurement is at the core of what I'm trying to encourage the whole procurement profession to do globally. And that's what I'm saying is share. I want procurement professionals around the world to share their knowledge and share their insights for a couple of reasons. One is that I'm a huge believer in the procurement profession, right, and I really want to make sure the C-level, the CEOs, CFOs of the world understand the value that procurement can deliver. So, you know, when people go to Google the word procurement, there up comes this rich array of information about all the amazing things we do. So unless people like you share the stories, unless people are on LinkedIn sharing their knowledge, or I guess more importantly on Procurious
right.
Sharing their knowledge, you know, nobody will know about us, and it'll be quite easy for procurement to sort of be pushed to the sidelines. I mean, I just joked about Procurious, but I think, you know, importantly, rather than, you know, we're doing a big job promoting procurement to the business world, but, you know, really our platform allows the profession itself to share. And, you know, I think procurement can be a lonely place. So if you can connect with other people, you know, it makes it that much easier. So those are a couple of reasons. I think another is, you know, being an entrepreneur myself, Philip, you know, I know how hard it is to get these things started, right, and I really wanted to support you. And I guess I just wanted to ask you, why did you start Art of Procurement?
Yeah, turning the tables. You know, some of the same reasons that you did. Part of it was for my own personal development. So as I was looking to leave Accenture, which was my last employer, you know, on the corporate side of things, I really got into listening to podcasts as a way of learning. And I listened to a ton of entrepreneurship type podcasts, and there was just nothing related to procurement. So I thought, well, at least there wasn't anything on that was published on a consistent basis. So I thought maybe there's a gap there. There's a need that could be filled using audio as, you know, a different channel. When I started it, I had no clue whether anybody would ever listen. And so at that point, it was more for my own self-development. You know, I was thinking, I always believe in pushing yourself to do things that you're uncomfortable doing. And yes, I was definitely very uncomfortable starting the podcast. You know, I can't tell you. In fact, I can still picture myself on my dining room table doing the prep for our first interview when we talked. And I probably spent like hours and hours and hours and hours in prep because I wanted it to be just right. And because I was pretty uncomfortable kind of doing it. And so there was that in terms of my own learning, but also thinking that if nobody ever listens, then I'm still going to learn. I'm still going to be taught to people that I look up to, that I respect, and kind of mature my own thinking in procurement, and then at the same time kind of deep down hoping that it would be successful, or it would be interesting enough for people to want to listen in. It was around the same things that you talked about. You know, it's being really passionate about the profession, seeing what the opportunities are for us, but also that I think we need to think a little differently, and we need to showcase the best of procurement so we can all learn from it and kind of move from what procurement may have been in the past because of the bad reputation that we have in some parts. And, you know, on the other hand, when I was a buyer, I did a number of things as a buyer, but one of the things I was responsible for was outsourcing and offshoring. And I also managed a captive offshore center in India. And when I was doing that, I saw lots of people who would tell me, my job is too important, or what I do, my company values too much, I'm not going to be impacted. And time again, I would see that people would be impacted in a way that they just didn't expect. It surprised them. And I wanted to use this as kind of a way to help myself and to help listeners of the show to be on the right side of kind of history, if you will. You know, to be people who are pushing the change rather than being impacted negatively by the change. And I thought this would be a great platform to help do that.
Well, it seems like our interests are very aligned then. I'm glad we've asked you to, you know, work with us on the Big Ideas Summit. So, you know, thank you agreeing to that. And, you know, well done on all you've achieved so far. But I think another important point, and for everyone who's listening, is when you reached out to me, the first thing I did was to go to your LinkedIn profile. Mm-hmm. And, you know, this is a point we make to everyone about their social media profile, is that that's what people do now. If someone reaches out to them, they go and search social media to find out about that person. And particularly when we talk about Generation Next, if you don't have any information on social media, they'll probably disregard you because, well, this person really isn't an influencer, or they haven't achieved anything in their life. So, you know, when I looked at your profile, I thought, here's a guy with a lot of rich procurement experience who really, has worked globally. And of course, I want to talk to him and find out what he's doing. So I think that's an important point, for everyone is just make sure that your media profile really reflects the professional you are, even if you don't want to share and be very active on social media. At least make sure your profile is there, very good photo, and great reflection of the work that you've done in procurement.
That's a really good point, because whenever I have the opportunity to interview guests, and I'm very fortunate now that I have partnerships where a number of guests may be kind of presented as opportunities for me to talk to. The very first thing I do for every single person is to go and look at their LinkedIn profile. And that gives me an understanding of, again, do I think that there's experiences and a background that would be interesting for other people to listen to on the show? It's so important.
Well, that's right. And the other thing is that, every CPO wants to have the best talent working for them, because that makes your life easier, and it helps you deliver the results that are required. And the very first thing that a potential employee does is to go and research you, just like you and I have. So it's not just about promoting yourself; it's about attracting the best talent and making sure you have the A team. And people want to work for people who are connected and well known.
Right.
So it's got a lot of benefits, and I know a lot of people are nervous about it, but I'm sort of going off on a tangent there. Obviously, it's something I'm passionate about.
Yeah, so how has Procurious evolved over the last 18 months since we last talked?
Well, you're talking to obviously a very biased source here.
Right.
We're delighted. I mean, just like when you started Art of Procurement, it is a big step. But I had a fundamental belief that the procurement profession would benefit from being able to connect with each other and share and learn. So we've gone I think next week we'll probably tick over 20,000 members across 140 countries. And I think what we're really excited about is the level of discussion that we're able to generate on in the community. But we have crazy numbers of people reading our blogs who aren't even members of Procurious, because they'll just do an organic search on Google and find what we've been talking about. And, some of these pieces are, being read 100,000 times. So that makes us feel like, before we started Procurious, that didn't exist. So we feel we're doing our bit to share, and our community's sharing. And then, of course, we've been able to work with some amazing partners like the Hacker Group, who, I'm sure that like me, they've been well respected for, the whole time I've been in procurement, with their benchmarking and their advisory, and the amazing Chris Swordchuck and what he brings to the profession. But then also IBM, we had 600 people register for the Man and Machine webinar last week on cognitive procurement. And, I think when you're a procurement professional, you are always somewhat, it's our job to be a bit, not critical, but we have to assess these suppliers. But we've also got to remember these are the guys that are developing the thought leadership for the profession. And, that was the other sort of penny that dropped for me in starting Procurious, is that these, service providers are a really important part of our community. And they also employ a lot of procurement professionals. So they're not sort of like the enemy. These are actually part of our profession and actually play a very rich role. So we're really working with these partners to uncover their stories and to uncover the information they have that we think will be of benefit to the community. And I think that's a big difference for the content that we have on Procurious, is if we are working with a sponsor or a supplier, we really work with them to find out what knowledge they have that would benefit the community. So there's, as preparing a couple of hours to interview me the first time, that takes work, but we believe that it pays off. So, yeah.
Do you think that the way that procurement professionals access information is changing? Because historically it may be that there was maybe one or two sources of information. Now there's an explosion of sources, and it's almost difficult to figure out what's the right places to go, and what's the information that's kind of presented without bias. So do you see that there's been a change in in how to access thought leadership, or where to go for thought leadership versus perhaps in the past?
Oh, well, absolutely. And, we've just talked about it. You Google everything now. Yeah. And the thing is, I guess 20 years ago, before we had Google, it would be based on our relationships and sort of huge volumes of reports that we'd receive from very expensive subscription fees from these research houses. And I think there's also, what's different is we used to think, well, knowledge is power.
Yeah.
And that procurement used to be the bastion of certain pieces of knowledge. But of course now our stakeholders or our internal customers can also access that information. And, therefore procurement has to look for, given there's been this democratization of information, what's the value that we can deliver? And I think it, funnily enough, comes back to relationships and also our focus on what we do and understanding the 360-degree story of the category or the area that we manage. And our internal stakeholders don't have the time, nor is it their job to be focusing solely on that category or what's happening in the market. So I think we can be a lot more informed. We can build our fact base up a lot faster and deeper, and then use that almost as the starting point to going out ourselves and using our own commercial knowledge and nous to add the next layer of insight. And I think that's the same for the research houses. Really what we're paying for now is the experience and the insight and that sort of 20 years of being in the space and knowing what's a trend, what's not, and what have you. So I think that holds true for, this whole cognitive procurement space too. It's a big opportunity for us to use technology to get this huge base load of analysis and insight work done, but there's still going to be a role for someone to pull it all together and say, right, what does this actually mean? So that's a very long answer to a great question. I hope that provided value for someone.
Yeah, and on the point of, you mentioned cognitive there, and the fact that machines aren't necessarily going to take over everything, but we need to know how to interpret the kind of the explosion of information that will be becoming available because of some of these new technologies. So it's really making us into more intelligent procurement professionals, not necessarily taking away all the jobs from us.
No, and this is why we're excited about the Big Ideas Summit, because we really want to get to the bottom of cognitive procurement. I hadn't even heard that term until 12 months ago at our last Big Ideas Summit, and now all of a sudden it's all we can talk about on Procurious, because we want to make sure we're ahead of the curve, and we want to make sure our profession understands this. And we're using hopefully a bit of a humorous line that has global sort of meaning to people, which is, are we there yet? Right. Anyone who has children on a long car journey will know exactly what I'm talking about. And I think that people think, oh, if I don't have robots on my factory floor now, or if I aren't using Watson for my negotiations, am I way behind the curve? And what's happening out there? So we're really trying to use our global community as a repository for determining where we're at. And the good news is for everyone is that, of course, we are still on the ground floor with cognitive procurement, and really the Procurement 4.0 as we're talking about later today. But, so people don't need to relax, but what they do need to do is to get in early and understand, and we've got a few tips for people who want to get started. But I think you wanted to ask me something, Philip.
No, I was going to ask, actually, you talked about the fact that cognitive has been a big part of the discussion on Procurious and continues to be so. I was wondering, what's at the top of the hearts and minds of procurement professionals who are on and engaging with the content on Procurious? What are people most concerned or worried or interested in reading about right now? Well,
look, for a lot of us, it's the day-to-day. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to find a supplier. Should I do my professional certification? I'm looking to employ someone. So I think we've also got to be realistic that, 80% of the profession out there are actually just doing the do, and it's not just doing the do. Doing the do is very important.
Yeah.
So I think we're talking about, much less than 20%, but the top 1% are sort of outliers, the people who are reaching to look at cognitive and the latest developments in some of the largest companies in the world are the ones that are most interested. But, we had, as I mentioned earlier, 600 people log in for Man and Machine webinar, and I think there is a lot of interest around cognitive, and I guess we have the early adapters or the future leaders probably are attracted to the Procurious community. So it probably holds true that we would have a lot of people interested in these new topics, given that we're dealing with a subset of the whole profession. So, so the short answer is, I think, the full gamut, Phil, people interested in the latest things, but also in just finding people out there in the procurement universe who can help them with the day-to-day.
And that's definitely what I see with Art of Procurement. I try and do a mix of both forward-looking but also things that are actionable today, because, you can have too much content that looks to the future, and professionals still have stakeholders wanting answers, wanting help to do certain things today, and that's just as important, but it's just we haven't to lose sight, and I think the technologies that are coming is going to drive what our profession looks like in the future, so those that are kind of engaged in that conversation will be positioned best to take advantage of it.
Well, look, and something I really like to always remind people in our profession is we talk a lot about stakeholder engagement and relationship management with our customers. And one thing we've got to remember is to make a really strong impression when we have that face or phone time with our stakeholders. And I think one of the benefits of having a rich network, of being part of a community, is that you can weave into your conversation things like, well, I know that at Chevron, they're doing this, and at Apple, they're doing this, and I know that into the future we'll be doing this. And that builds a lot of credibility. If you can be seen as someone who's connected and knows what's happening, in the outside world, it brings a richness to the relationships that you have internally. So I think that's a really powerful message that I want to reinforce to everyone into procurement is, look, it's really important not to just be too internally focused, and that understanding what's happening in the broader community and business world really will pay off for you in terms of, even if your company isn't doing any of these things, if you're aware of it and can talk about it, I think it's very powerful. Yeah, you're bringing the outside in.
Yeah, I've said that so much actually in recent podcasts, is that, where our future lays is looking on the outside and bringing the disruptions that are happening outside of our organizations in, so that we start to influence the what and the how that our organizations buy. Yes, we still got to take care of business, but when the difference maker is probably not going to be, unless you're perhaps in an automotive environment or a manufacturing environment where margins of 1 or 2% make the difference, but that 1, 2, 3% cost saving isn't necessarily what's going to be a competitive advantage for your company. But bringing in new technology and understanding new delivery models is, if you're kind of first to market or the first to implement and execute things like that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a great point. And another benefit to being aware of what's happening in the world is this whole idea of disruption, or obviously innovation. Let's look at disruption. Well, you can read about what's happening to other companies, and whilst it may not be a relevant issue for you, you can sort of project onto your own company and what would be an equal disruption for us. And we talked about thinking the unthinkable, and I think you're going to be talking with the very interesting Nick Gowing, who spoke at Big Ideas last year, about thinking the unthinkable. And this is a huge opportunity for the procurement profession, because what Nick will share with you, without giving away too much, Philip, is that a lot of senior management is caught in a paradigm. They are caught in a paradigm, and that the catastrophic failure of a lot of companies to sort of address change and really adequately solve some of these disruptions has been that senior leadership's caught in this paradigm. So if procurement can stay connected and understand what's happening with disruptions around the world, then they'll be a lot more agile and hopefully be able to respond quickly and provide solutions for solving these problems. So that's a really big opportunity for procurement to be the problem solver, the agile, out of the box thinker when a problem strikes. And I think the same holds true for innovation and our point about bringing the outside in. If you're connected and understand what's happening in other industries, then you're going to be a lot more flexible in your thinking and be able to drive new ideas and innovation into your own company. So yeah, lots of benefits there.
Yeah, and the only thing for sure is, we talk about all the potential disruption in procurement. Every one of our stakeholders is facing exactly the same challenge and problem and opportunity within their own function. And it's all coming from the outside. So we're really positioned to help them understand what that looks like.
Absolutely. And once again, those stories and conversations that you have with them about what other companies are doing will be, great insight. And I always use the example is, if you have a strong network, I had a great example with one of our clients, and he was given 24 hours notice to justify a big change that they were doing. He had a strong network, so he was able to ring 6 peer companies and within 6 hours have all their data and be able to justify his case. Right. And you can only get that if you've got a trusted relationship with your peers. So, his COO was very impressed with the data he was able to produce the next day on a question that was asked. So, there's lots of benefits.
That actually talks to something that is kind of off at a tangent again, but we talked about, how the strength of social media and in building networks and building relationships, but then trying to take those relationships one step further. So that's something that has really opened my eyes the last 12 months of doing the Art of Procurement, is that one, kind of the growth of the opportunities to meet great people across the profession. And a lot of great people are so willing to share because we all want to help each other collectively. But then trying to take it further and thinking, how can you help? Because you never know when you may have benefit from reaching out to those people, even in person, and just kind of going a level deeper than just connecting to somebody on LinkedIn and actually making it kind of a real conversation, a real connection.
Well, that's right. And I think it's important that people understand that social media, I just say it's like the speed dating part of networking. It helps you. It's a little bit like we were talking about with market intelligence earlier. Social media, Google, helps you get that base load of information to get you started. So you can reach out, you can read their profile, you can see where the connection points, whether they're the right people. Before we had LinkedIn and Procurious, you couldn't see that. You had to meet someone maybe 6 times before you found out you went to the same university or you worked in the same company. Whereas now you can sort of pre-qualify your network and find out people around the world that have mutual interest to you, and then you can build on it, like you and I have. You pick up the phone, you connect via Skype, and then one day hopefully we'll meet, and then the relation becomes so much deeper. So it's really about quickly being able to find people that you share a mutual interest with, and then you've got to build the relationship. So face-to-face is still very critical for, your community and your networks. There's no doubt about it. And that's why we're doing these big ideas summits around the world, Philip, because we know people want to connect together. They want to actually meet other Procurious members, and they want to hear from these thought leaders in the flesh. So I don't think it's an either or anymore. I don't think you can just be all online or all face to face. And it's the same with training as well. So we've got to have a hybrid.
And you talked a little bit earlier about Procurement 4.0 and actually then just mentioned the Big Idea Conference, the Big Idea Summit, that will be in London just a couple of days actually after we publish the interview. And you've kind of branded the series of summits, I think, around Procurement 4.0 this year.
Yes.
I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about What does Procurement 4.0 mean to you?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if Procurious actually made that up ourselves, did we? I think we kind of what was BME, or it's just been in the last 6 months, because I think obviously everyone's talking about Industry 4.0, which are the huge changes we're seeing in things like manufacturing capability, obviously digitisation. I think the best examples I sort of use of Industry 4.0 that people can relate to is, drones for logistics and delivery,
right.
3D printing. How is that going to change your manufacturing footprint? Well, you won't probably have one if you can print and create things on the spot. If we look at car manufacture, the different materials that we're going to be able to use, the composites and what have you, the Internet of Things, the technology that's going to actually run buildings, run cars, run everything. So all these changes are meaning huge quantum shifts for the way that businesses operate. And when we talk about Procurement 4.0, then of course we're talking about, well, how's that going to change the way that the procurement profession has to operate? So that's really the question, and the big professional association for Germany, BME, did a very comprehensive white paper, which we have on Procurious, and to be honest, it was a fantastic piece of paper, but it really opened up the questions rather than having the answers. And right. I think that's where we all need to be right now, is asking questions and actually being quite inquisitive about these changes. And what I would encourage the profession to do is to actually, if your company isn't trying any of these new developments, is to actually work with your supply base and understand what they're doing. And I think that would be the first step I would recommend for anyone who's trying to understand Procurement 4.0. Obviously listen into Big Ideas Summit, but also just use your supply base. It's such a rich source of information. I'm sure you found that, Phil, in your roles.
Absolutely. It's one of those things that and I think that it was a reason why I was perhaps able to be successful on the practitioner side is that, all too often we look at our suppliers as a transaction. And yet our suppliers collectively have so much more capability than our internal company could ever hope to have. It's just, the law of numbers, because you're working with so many different companies, that I always saw them as a great source of information. And, I always wanted to cultivate those relationships so they felt comfortable sharing things with me, as opposed to it just being a transaction. So, absolutely finding out, I think, what your suppliers are doing to try and embrace this themselves. Because like we said before, stakeholders are facing these same challenges, but so is every single supplier. Yes.
And the great news about being in procurement is everyone does usually, hopefully, want to come to you and share their ideas. Right. So make sure that door is open. And this is one of the things when people say, oh, I don't want a social media profile. Well, how are people going to find you and connect with you and come and share the latest thinking? If they don't know you exist and you're not accepting, connection invitations from suppliers, then how are you going to be connected with that supply base? And I know it's a challenge for managing a lot of the approaches that CPOs and other people get, but that is part of the job, and one of your skills is to actually filter out those who you do want to meet and hear about what they're doing, and obviously not. But if that door's shut, you're going to miss out on that one piece of information that could change your future or your company's future. So that's really our message, is to stay open and learn. At Big Ideas in London, we're really trying to bring in some great thought leaders and help share what the latest is and some of the aspirational information. And it's not just about the technology. It's also about being agile and looking at your teams. We'll have IBM speaking about cognitive procurement, obviously, but the Hacker Group are really going to talk more about how you stay agile, how you create a culture within your organisation that will be able to move with the changes in innovation. We're also talking about how you can build innovative teams. We have a really fascinating headmaster from a school in the UK.
Right.
Focuses on just dyslexic and dyspraxic boys in their junior education, and he talks about how having a neurodiverse, that's another term I hadn't heard, a neurodiverse team can also really help with the innovation and flexibility and problem solving. So I think John Floyd will be one of the more interesting speakers on the day. It should be a very interesting. We'll talk a lot about the macroeconomic environment as well, and just so people can get in the zone and be aware of the threats.
One of the things that was pretty consistent with last year with the Big Idea Summit, and certainly when I look at the roster of speakers, not just for London, but for some of the other events you have around the world, is that you're looking outside of the function, outside of the profession, to bring insights, back in so that we can learn from things that are going on the outside. And I think that's really important, and it's something that we don't really do enough, in my opinion, as a profession. I just wonder if you could kind of talk to the motivation behind doing that and going that direction.
Well, really, that's been at the core of my sort of 15-year journey with my companies, is that, and the faculty has run a very successful CPO forum for the last 10 years. Actually, we're celebrating 10 years this year. And that has always been the focus, is to bring the outside in. I think there's a lot of procurement conferences out there that really have procurement professionals talking to other procurement professionals and CPO sharing, and there's definitely a role for that. But what we want to focus on is, getting inside the head of the C-level, understand what's happening with the business environment, because the best procurement professionals are going to be continually adapting their strategies to align with the business strategy and the business environment. So we want to help those people understand what the macroeconomic landscape is, what the trends are, and then they can adjust accordingly. So we try and work with our speakers and tailor it slightly, but really they're usually experts in their area. They present on that, and then we help with the interpretation. And that's part of having a think tank, is that those 50 influencers in the room can then have a discussion and interpret what that means for the profession, and then we amplify that to our audience. Right. So I think last year we had sort of 4.3 million sort of mentions or shares through social media about big ideas, and it's just a very powerful way of amplifying information, particularly in an environment where it is really difficult to get the money to get to conferences, the time to go to conferences, and literally by doing it this way, you can sit in your office or at home or on your phone and participate. So it's very convenient, very affordable, and hopefully very informative.
You asked earlier what were some of my inspirations for starting Art of Procurement, and that was actually one of them, was the fact that there's so many people, and I was one of those people included, who could never really, I couldn't get my companies to pay for me to go to events or conferences. So there was no way that I had to access some of the thought leadership that is actually available to people who would join. So it's about making that a lot more accessible.
Absolutely.
I know that a big part of Big Idea is the online aspect of it, and the community and the kind of activities that surround the day as it happens in London and beyond. And so I wondered if you could just explain a little bit more about that and how any Art of Procurement listener could get involved on the day.
Yes, so if you go to the Big Ideas Summit webpage, or, it's all over Procurious at the moment, you can register as a digital delegate. And what that means is that you're then part of a group, and that we will be sharing as blogs on what the speakers are talking about. There'll be some videos of the actual speakers, and every attendee at the Big Ideas Summit will also do a 3-minute video of their big ideas. So that will also be shared after the event. Of course, the amazing podcast series that Art of Procurement is developing will be a feature of that. And once again, you get to connect. Last year there were 800 members of that Big Ideas group. You can see who's also joined, if there's anyone like-minded that you want to connect with within the Procurious network. So it's like a subset of the Procurious community that is interested in Procurement 4.0. So you can connect with those people. But obviously on the day, if you have questions, you can post those in that group and we will share that with the speakers. Also, you can tweet your questions. We'll be obviously monitoring the Procurious hashtag and the handle, I should say. And so you can participate that way digitally as well.
And if you're listening to this show after the event, which I think is February 23rd, if you're listening after that, then you can still join up to the group to access all the content.
Absolutely. You can join the group for the year following until the next Big Ideas Summit and access all that information.
So, Tania, I know that we're coming up against time right now. So I just want to thank you so much for your time today and kind of sharing some of your thoughts on Procurement 4.0, but also the passion that you have for really driving forward the procurement community, because that's just so obvious. And for anybody who's listening, sign up for Big Ideas for the London Summit, become a digital delegate. We mentioned it a couple of times there as we talked about the fact that I'm really excited to be producing a series of 5 different podcasts with keynote speakers from the event, and you have to be a digital delegate to be able to access and listen to those. So highly encourage you to go and do that. I've had a great time kind of interviewing the guests that I've had the opportunity to work with. So Tania, just thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.